All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Com4 26. So this particular video, I actually can put my face. I wanted to do it kind of on the on the lecture, but unfortunately, because those slides have been kind of made ahead of time, I think if I were to put my face anywhere in any corner of those slides, something is going to get cut off. So I did not include it there. But I think for this one, it will be helpful to have it so that you're not just kind of staring at the code, and maybe it makes it feel a little bit less dry to actually see your instructor. All right. So what we're going to be doing today, this is a supplemental video, so you don't have to watch it. It's not required. It's going to be less formal. But we're actually going to be working with our Next.js kind of setup here that we have. This is actually the very similar setup to what you'll have in AO5, the Pokédex app. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be recreating the CSXL organization page. And I'm going to be doing this kind of from scratch here. And I kind of want to show the process of how to develop a full app from scratch using the tools we know, because everything that we have learned so far, we actually have all the tools that we need in order to make something like this. So I'm going to show you real quick what this site looks like. So this is the CSXL. Many of you have probably been on this site before, or you have developed for this site before, and you'll see that we have this. We have these individual cards for each organization. And then when you press on the organization, you end up seeing some details about the organization. And the extent of what I'm going to be doing, also you're seeing some admin features here because I am, let me go back to organizations. I am an admin on the real Excel site since I am a developer for it. So these buttons might not appear on the regular view. So we're only going to be making the regular, We're only really going to be making the regular view here and kind of working from here. Right. So the CSXL site also has APIs that enable us to access all of this data individually. So particularly, we can load this by going to csxl.unc.edu/API. And I spoiled it. Let's go back to, it's actually /docs, not /API. And so in /docs, this actually allows us to see all the APIs on this particular site. And you can see one of them is this /API organizations. And what this ends up returning are a list of objects that look like this, where you can see there are these details about the organization. And this is what's used ultimately to render this page. And I can prove that by if I go to inspect element and I go to the network tab right here and I refresh this page, you'll see that there has been a network request made. You can see that I tried to access the API endpoint for organizations. I end up with a response that includes all of the organization data. Right? So this is that same, requesting data from an API. We're going to be doing that. And then with the result of that, actually make something appear on our page. Right? So we'll be doing that piece. And then another thing that we're going to include is going to be the detail page right here and loading that up. And if we have time, we might be able to try the search bar. I don't know if we'll have time. We'll see kind of how things go and how things progress. All right. So let's look at this code. So you can actually clone this if you go to the organization repository, and this might be kind of in the announcement with this video as well. You can clone the CSXL organization recreation repo. This should be public, and so that will serve as the starter code for today. And this might be renamed to be CSXL org recreation. It'll be something similar. This is kind of long, so it might rename it. All right. So when you have that, you should end up with this basic structure. Right. So what we end up having, and I'll see if I can turn on my annotations here. Okay. Yes. So I have my pencil. You can see here I have two main folders. I have my dev container folder and I have my web folder. Right. So this dev container folder is specifically for dev container setup so that I can run Docker properly. And then over here, I have a folder which is going to contain my Next.js project, right? So what we generated in lecture 14 using the create next app command, that is what is in this folder. So if you open web, this is my full Next.js project, okay? why this is important is because when we load up our terminal here, we want to make sure that we cd into the web folder before we start trying to perform any operations such as npm install or npm run dev. Okay, it's always a good idea, remember, when creating a new dev container, to install your repositories using npm install, install your dependencies. And in this case, you can see that we installed, I think, one package. And I can also write now npm run dev to see what this page will look like on our localhost browser. So you can see here we have local, and if I open this up, you can now see hello world. So this is kind of our very, very basic starting point here. And I'm going to be showing everything. I'm going to be showing styling. I'm going to be showing getting data, kind of the full development process. You can see, really get first hand kind of a view of what developing in Next looks like. All right, so I have this here. And the first thing that I want to do is to probably change the background color and this title to better match what I have here. Right? So there are many different tools that you can use for this. You can probably inspect element and directly find the background color. You might be able to do that. There might be a way to do that in here. If it's kind of hard, on Windows, I'm sure there's color pickers, and on Mac, there's actually something called color meter. If those of you who are on Mac, you could, this is built in to the computer, by the way, you may have not seen it, and you can change your display native values, I think under view, and then display values, select as hexadecimal rather than as decimal. So if you select as hexadecimal, it becomes very easy to then find the color, right? So you can see that as I highlight my mouse over here and as I change my mouse, like if I hover Pearl Hacks, right, is giving me the colors. So I can go here and you can see that the color of my background particularly is going to be F2ED F6, right? So that's going to be the color. And so what I can do now is I can go back to my index.tsx, right? So index is my home page. That's what's currently loading. And I'm going to delete what I have. Well, I'll keep my paragraph, I guess, but instead I will wrap this in a div. So I'm going to say return. We'll have a div for our page. And specifically, I want my background color, so I can write BG, to be the color that I have selected. And let me move my paragraph into this div so that it becomes easier here. All right, and so now we have everything running. And so if I go back to my page right here, you should see, I now have the same background color on my site. The only thing you'll notice is that my background is only taking up to where my content is. It's not filling the whole page. And so to do that, we can add a style in here that is, I think, HScreen. And by adding HScreen, you can see that now this goes to the entire width. The entire height of my page. So by adding HScreen, we end up with this. We were adding basically 100 vertical height to this. And so it's going to be 100% of my vertical height. Now on my real site, you'll also notice that I have a bit of spacing right around my header. It's not just directly in the top here. And so there are a few ways of doing this, right, and fixing this problem. One way you might think of is let's just add some margin to this header, which we could do. So I could say, for example, like MT, maybe let's just say 4, which gives me a margin top of 16 and a margin left of 16. And you can see that, well, that kind of works, but now it's making my, it's like making some of this white. And also, you know, in reality, it would actually be better instead of just offsetting this particular, instead of offsetting my header by 16 pixels and 16 pixels here, it might make more sense to actually add a padding to my overall div, right? Because then everything in my site, not just the first item, has a bit of inset. So like if I were to write another one like another, you'll see that this is at the edge. And we don't want that. So just to fix all of it, we can just add a padding to our page. And I'm actually going to make this much larger. I think a padding of even 24 pixels might be small. Let's try 32. So that's P8. We can remove these margins here. And now we're left with a pretty big inset. And what we can actually do is if we want to be really specific, we can probably find it. Yeah, so we use a 16 here from the edge. because I'm not really including this toolbar. So let's go back to 6. I think 24 pixels is probably a happy in between. There we go. And if I really want to make this text as big as what I have over there, I can change it from text LG to text XL, and that should make it bigger. Right, so you can see it's getting a bit bigger. I can make it even bigger by writing 2XL here, and I think that makes it, there we go. So that looks pretty similar. And I can change my header here to say organizations. Right, so now I kind of have my organization's header looking, pretty similar. And the first thing that I want to do is, well, I need some data, right, in order to load my organizations. Now, in the last lecture, I showed you the get server-side props version of loading data, and we will try that out. We will try that out on the individual pages, but for our entire page here, I am going to use the traditional approach of client-side fetching. And the reason I'm doing that is because in the assignment that you're about to have, I introduce this new library called React Query. Now, React Query is an amazing library. So if you, first of all, if you have not kind of reviewed React Query or watched this video, particularly watch this video or kind of read this text here, please do that first. So you can leave this video, read this, watch this video, and then come back. Because this explains it really well. This is an amazing video that kind of helps to illustrate what problems React Query solves. And using this code here, kind of as an example, it makes everything a bit easier, right? So I am going to show you the process of how to install it, which is down here, because I don't have it installed right now, so I need to do that. And also how to go about using this use query hook to load organization data. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first try to install React Query. So you'll see here that I have these 2 commands that I need to run. And these 2 commands were actually got from the official page. Like if you go to React Query documentation, and then go to, I believe it's read the docs, and then installation, you'll see that this step is here. And there might even be oh yes, I need to redirect to the latest version. There we go. npm I tanstack query, it says here on how to install it. And then there's also this plugin, which makes, which helps us in terms of finding errors and stuff. So that's always nice. The actual setup though, for how to get the rest of it set up is not in this particular page, it's somewhere else. And so that's why I included some extra setup here. All right, so I'm going to show you by first installing these 2. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to create a new terminal tab so that I can install packages. Remember that I need to cd into web in order to do this because web is my overall Next.js project. So this I have to cd in here first. I can run this npm install. You can see it added 2 packages. It updated my package lock JSON. And now I can go back here and install the second one. And you'll see that it has done so. And now it is installed. In addition, I can go to, now I need to do these things in terms of actually getting it set up. And this is setting up a provider. So we actually will not be talking about providers until Friday. And we'll kind of be talking about providers in a different context than it's used here. So you don't have to know the specifics. But what I will say is that React Query has kind of this, it has what's known as a query client, which you can see here. And it's basically one object. You can kind of think of it like a singleton, right? We have this one object, and then we want to provide this one query to every component that we render, which is why we're wrapping the overall component in our app, like underscore app.tsx file. We want this query client to be available to everybody. Okay, so that's why it's being wrapped here. And the reason why we have such an object is because when we're loading a bunch of data, there's actually some caching and different optimizations that can happen behind the scenes. And so React Query is going to deal with that, as well as just give us, the general API that we can use. So that's why we have to do this. So I'll copy this here, step 1. So in app.tsx, above my overall component, because this is global, I'm going to initialize a query client. And you'll see that if I try to import, it should import from this tanstack at React Query, right? And then I need to wrap my component with the query provider. So I can move this component in here, like so, add indenting, and I'm going to return this. Okay, and you'll see that I need import. So another cool thing is if you kind of click and type, and because I'll do this occasionally, command dot, it opens up. It's like a shortcut for the quick fix menu. So like when you want to import something, you can just like click command shift dot and then press add import, right? So it makes it really easy to do that as well. Okay. So we have now React query setup. That's, as you can see here, that's actually all that we need. And so from here, we can work with loading our data. Now, one thing that you'll find that's actually given to you in A5 are what we call model files. And I think I have something about this written here, which is, right, I noted this, like this particular API endpoint returns a object of this type. Right, and so if you scroll down, you'll see this important note about data types, and that whenever we get some data back from our fetch call, it's actually going to return this very generic type of any, and that's not really good because it's very then hard for us to be able to access properties and do a bunch of things on our object. Manipulate our object becomes very challenging, and so we want to cast this to an actual like TypeScript type so that it becomes easier. And so you can see that we do that by doing this, where we say await response.json as unknown, and then as our type. But we right now don't have any type to actually model our data, and so let's make one. Now, one thing which is really cool is if you go back to the API for the organizations page on the Excel site, it actually gives us a example of what our object should have. So it'll say that like we have a name that's a string, we have slug that's a string, we have a flag for whether the organization is public or not, which is true. And so this is going to be the shape of the data that is ultimately returned by this API. And I can show you by pressing try out and then execute that this should give me, you can see it's giving me an array of data like this. And so this is the shape of the data that we're working with. And so we should define that as a TypeScript type so that when we fetch our data, we can convert it to this type, and then it's very easy to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go back to my models, and maybe let's just say I create a new file here that's like organization.ts. And I'm going to write a comment that has this in it so that it's easy for us to copy. Right, so let me do that here. And so now we have this model kind of defined. Let's make it. So we can do this by, in fact, look at that. Copilot did it for me. So you can see we are writing an interface, and I'm actually going to do this slightly differently than the way that GPT is telling me. And maybe as I'm typing, it'll do it for me. But I'm going to write export type instead of an interface and set it equal to this object, right? So I just tabbed it in. This just did all the hard work for me. I took my ID, which is a number, name, which is a string, shorthand string, etc., all the way and finished this. So I'll just delete my comment now. And the reason why I'm using a type is simply because it's a bit idiomatic in TypeScript to do so. If you were to do interface instead, that's also okay. So if I did interface and then remove this equal sign, this is also valid. So there's two kind of different ways of making these data types. I prefer type these days because I think it makes more sense, and it kind of helps to separate this from our traditional like preconceived notion of what of what an interface is, right, from something like Java. So this helps us to keep everything separate. Okay, so I have my organization data here. This is the shape of the data, and now I need to get the data, right? So as you can kind of see here in my, where is it? Over here, there we go. This is the instructions. I think I provided an example of what we have to do. And so basically what we want to do is we want to load all of our data. And once we load our data, we want to make it available to the user. And when we do this, we use this useQuery hook. So with useQuery, you'll see that it takes in two parameters. It takes in a key and a query function. And this function is going to be a async function that actually returns our data. So let's start there, right? We need to create some sort of function that's going to request this data from this API right here. And so let's do so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my index.tsx right over here. And you actually could move this somewhere else. You could put the fetch in here, and I'll start off with this. So I can say like const get organizations equals async, and this creates a new async function. And then in here, I need to get my data. So I can say, for example, here, const response equals awaits, fetch, and then what I'm going to be fetching is data from this endpoint. And then I am going to say like const data equals await response.json, because remember, this JSON call is also asynchronous. So we need to make sure that we add await here. This will convert this to a like JSON object, and then we can cast it to my organization type that I defined so that it's easy to work with and we can access all the fields, right? Because right now, if I just do this and I were to do data, you'll see that data is of type any, right? And if I did like dot, I can't access any of the fields here. Like if I start typing like shorthand, see, it doesn't autocomplete for me. It's not that good. So we can say here as unknown as organization. And particularly, this is going to be a list of organizations because I am returning a lot of them. So we can write it like this, as organization. And now that we have this data, well, let's return it. So we can return data, or I can just make this short and just return this, right? So that's very easy then. We have this, whoops. All right, we have this two-line function, which is used to actually get our organizations. And this is nice, but if we ever wanted to move this out, right? If we ever wanted to, for example, get organizations on many pages, having this one function repeated everywhere may not be the best. And so there's various ways of handling something like this. And in particular, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just for now, and this is not necessarily a best practice thing, this is kind of up to you, and you'll see kind of in future examples in the class that will change the way that we end up fetching data more and more. But for now, let's move this into its own file, kind of so it's easy to use. What I can do is under this data folder, I'll just make a new folder called queries. Queries is a term used to kind of to reference like a process of getting data, right? That's known as a query. And so I can make a new file called organization.ts. So this is queries for organizations. And I can go here, I can move this function out into this queries folder. Now remember, when I move this into its own folder, in order for me to be able to access this on a different page, I need to export the constant. So if I export it, it becomes available. And we'll also need to import. So again, I can use this command dot and then add import so that it's easy. And so now here, I can remove this unused import. And if I ever wanted to now access my organization data, I can just say get organizations, and you can see that it imports this in from my data folder, which is really nice, and I don't have to now worry, it's all in its own place. So if I added multiple queries, I can just put it in there. We don't have to worry about it, okay? So that's step one. We now have a function to actually get some data, but we need to still retrieve it. And so that is the purpose of useQuery, right? The useQuery hook makes it very easy to handle this process of loading data and all of the states that go along with it, such as if the data is loaded, if an error happened when loading the data, etc. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write here const result equals, and then use query. And so we can use just use query from our organization, or from React Query library right up here. And remember, we need two things. First, we need a list that contains our what we call our dependency list. And the first item in this dependency list is always some unique ID that we write. The reason why we have this ID is so that React Query knows how to identify the query we're working with. It's kind of like a unique ID. And if you noticed a bit ago, I mentioned about how React Query sometimes caches data and does some data management on that side, and it uses this ID to do so. So we need to include an ID. So you can do this anything. Like you could make this ID like something crazy. You probably shouldn't though, because that's not very descriptive. So we'll just write organizations. That's a fine query for now, or a query ID. And the next thing that we need to pass in is going to be our function. And actually, I realize this needs to be in an object. So let me move this to an object, and I believe it's first query key and then organizations. And then here we will write query function, and then we'll just pass in this function right in here. We don't need to even call it. We just put the name, and React Query will run this. Now the cool thing here is that this result is going to, you can see here that it has this, this resulting type of use query result. And what I want to do is I want to try and access this type. It's probably not going to let me, not now. Siri, let's see. Will it let me do that? Go to type definition. Does this do anything? Okay. So what I did here is I've broke into the module. I've broke into this tan-stack query to kind of see what this type is defining. And what you'll see here is that we have all these different fields, right? So if I go back, I can access result.data. So this is going to be the ultimate data. Once it's done loading, data will change from undefined to a list of organizations. I also have is loading, which is a Boolean to determine whether or not my data is still loading, like if I'm still waiting for the result to finish from the server. I could have error, which is error if there is an error that happened during my load. And these are all fields that are on my object. And so instead of having to do result.data and result.this and result.that every single time, we can use TypeScript's destructuring syntax to very quickly access these things. So what that means is instead of writing result here, I can write a braces and then type in directly data is loading and error. And what this does is it actually saves my data, whether or not it's loading, and error to 3 separate variables. So it takes that object that it returned, kind of broke it apart, and it broke it apart, and every single individual item ends up getting separated and extracted out. And so now if I want to access my data, I can just write console.log data. And if I run this and I go back to my page, let's see if this works. So if I go to inspect, I go to console. All right, so we do have this particular error here about access control checks. And so I believe with this, there's something that we have to add to the config of our project in order to get this to work. All right, everybody, I am back. Sorry for that. I did some investigating on the CORS issue, and it appears actually that attempting to use the official endpoint from the CSXL website is currently locked, which is probably for some security reasons. The main place that is locked is trying to do it from a localhost domain. So what I ended up doing, which is ours, right? We're in localhost 3000 right now. So what I ended up doing was I ended up running the XL website locally on my computer. So I downloaded it, I got it all working so that it's running at this localhost address. So if you're following along and you have not had Chris Jordan's class where you've cloned this before and used it, what I would recommend doing is trying to either follow along by watching the video rather than actually coding it, or you can try to wait a little bit. I'm going to see if I can get that turned on just temporarily so that you can try it. So if you don't have it running locally, in the meantime, I would try to write csxl.unc.edu and then /API and organizations. And I'm going to see if I can get that online. But I do want to finish the demo in the meantime because I think it'll still be valuable even if you are only able to watch it. Okay, so I do apologize. That's something I was not anticipating before making this. All right, but let's at least continue going since we are already close, right? I also tried, one of my things I tried doing was refactoring this, but I will just revert back to what we had, which was this organization, because this should work. So if I do that and then I do return, this is my original code. I was just testing some things out when doing this. And another thing that I need to delete real quick is go in here and delete this. So I was trying to test out some stuff. Okay. So now if I were to go back and I were to actually print this out, so if I did like console log data and I go back and I refresh, we should see now data actually appearing. Right, so we can see all of the organizations now loading now that I fixed that one API issue, and we can actually start to see some organization data, right? And this is all in the format of that organization field that we wanted, right? So that is all there. And so now that we have this data here, well, we want to do something with it. And the cool thing about this is we also have this is loading an error. So I can go ahead and add some validation so that while it's loading, my page can handle that loading state. And so what we can do here is we can, and you can see that it's auto-completing this code, but I'm going to write it out. So in my, I can kind of, put in TypeScript code into my JSX using this. And by writing this is loading and then at and then any other command, this is going to run, or it's going to basically show this element only when the condition to the left side is true, right? So in order for this component here to appear, this condition before needs to evaluate to true. So this will show up here loading, and I can do the same thing for error. So I can say here like error, and then let's just say that I have an error and I want to show the error message. I can just say here error.message if there's an error. So now when I go to my page, there's a brief flash you can see of that loading page, right? Because we're having to go to the server, get some data, come back, and there's all these things that we have to do. I'm going to close some of these tabs. The struggle is always real when developing something. I'm sure that you all have faced this too. The video, I'm cutting out the debugging process because it's irrelevant, but believe that quite a bit of time was spent there. So, all of these, every time something like this happens, that's okay. I will say that the API you'll be working with A'05 shouldn't have this issue, so you should not have to worry about it. All right. So now that we have this, well, maybe we'll want to now display some of the details for each of these organizations, right? So we have this data now here and we want to use it. Now, one cool feature also that I want to showcase here with this destructuring syntax is these variable names are based off of the field names in my returning data structure. What I can do though is if I don't like this name, let's say I wanted to rename this data to like organizations, I can just go here and with colon write organizations. And now if I were to print out organizations, you'll see that it does the same thing and it actually prints out my objects down here. Right, so this is pretty cool. I can rename these items. And a lot of times if I'm using, for example, like 2 or 3 or even 4 use queries on one page, right, which is possible on a large site, you don't want data and is loading an error, right? Because you would have that many times, you'd want to rename it. So I might do this just for consistency and say like organizations loading, organizations error, and then put is loading, or call this organizations loading and organizations error, right? That way it's just a little bit more clear and things are written out properly. So now what do I want to do? Well, if I have data, so if I have some data that is, if I have some data that's loaded, right, and I do this data and data will not be null anymore, so then I can use the data in here. And what I'll do is I will write, I will add these parentheses, and I can now write, and sorry, this is not data either. This is supposed to be organizations because I renamed it. So organizations, and I can now say organizations.map, and using this map command, I can iterate over all of my items. And so in here, let's just say that I say like P, and I write organization.name. You can now see, whoops, we have a failure to compile, probably because there is some missing, yeah, so I think this is redundant parentheses of some kind here. let's see. We have one here. We have 1, 2, 3. So we need 3 closing. So 2 should close it. There we go. And then what is this complaining about? Yes, missing key prop, right? So remember, when we're iterating over items, in order for React to be able to identify these dynamically generated items in the DOM, we need to add a key. And it's very common. So I can actually use the organization slug here as the key, but you can also use index as well and do it that way. So anyway, we'll go back, and now look, we have a list of all of these organizations from our page. Right, this is pretty cool. These might be slightly different because what I'm running locally, it might be using slightly outdated data. That's okay though. But we have some organization data, which is great. And so now that we have this, we can begin to show more details. So you'll notice that if I go to the main organizations page on the Excel site, we have like this nice like card right here. So we can make that into a React JSX here. So let's do that. So we can do that by making a div, right? A div is a very good way of always containing our elements. And I'm going to move this. So first my key, remember, because now key always goes on the item that's being repeated. And since I'm now repeating the div, I need to move the key there. So I'll move the key here, and let me move my paragraph inside of the div. And now you can see that I now have, well, nothing will show up because I have, everything's in a div though, right? So we can actually go into inspect and kind of inspect what styles are on here. So we have this padding of around 16 pixels. So let's do that. So under here, next to key, I can add class name to add Tailwind styles. And let's say that I want my padding to be 16. So that's going to be, I believe, maybe padding 4. Yep. If we go back, now you can see there's padding on each of these elements. Let's make the background color white. There we go. So now we have a nice background color. And let's round our cards. So round the corners by doing rounded XL. And now you can see that they're rounded, similar to here. And actually, I think they have a very similar rounding. And actually, now that I realize it, I don't think these are actually white entirely. So let's use our color meter tool to figure out what color it is so we can copy it. So it looks like it's going to be FC F8 F8 as the color. So instead of white, let's make it the custom color. That way we go for a more realistic recreation. There we go. So now we have our colors here. And of course, this is not what this looks like, right? This is kind of like a nice grid. So what we can do is we can make it, remember, in order to make items go left to right on our page, we need to have a flex row. So I can instead, I have this map here, but I can instead grab this map and put it inside of a div. And let's see, I think I need this. Okay, so now I have organizations and. So I'm going to move this into a div like this and have this map inside of here. Okay, so this looks a little bit confusing, but all I have done is basically just taken my repeating elements, which is this, and I moved it into a div so that I can style this div, right? Because these are my individual, like each of the cards on the screen, but I need a div to act as my flex box. So I can say class name, flex row, w full, which should give me a, there we go. So you can see it's now a flex box, it's going horizontal, it's a row, and it is expanding across my entire screen. Now, this doesn't look right because I want each of my cards to have have the same size. So I can figure out what size this is. It looks like it's 358-ish pixels. So I can go to now this, which is my card, and make maybe width. Is there anything close? Let's see if Tailwind has something built in that's kind of close to that number. Yeah, 384 looks good. So width 96, and looks like all of our items are still the same width. So we can fix that, but I think doing min width. There we go. So min width tells me that if my items, even if my items don't fill up the entire space, it has to be this width. And I'm also going to just make the regular width 96. So I have kind of a max and a min here. Now on my real page, there is some spacing between these elements. And we can actually see that there is one REM as our gap, we can ignore that and go here and just add a gap. So I think under this div right here, I can say gap, and that's 16 pixels. So I go back, and now you can see that all my items are separated by 16 pixels. The only problem is, of course, this is going on forever to the horizontal side. We want it to go to the next line when we're done. So we can add something called the flex wrap. So I think that's right here, flex wrap. And there we go. We now have our cards kind of wrapping. So whenever we reach the end of the screen, if we can't fit an item, we're going to go to the next line and do it. So that's really cool. We're also going to do the same thing with the height of these cards. So we have a width. Let's add a height. They specify 186 pixels. So maybe I'll do something similar. So here, let me add a height of, let's see what numbers I get. Whoops. My autocomplete. Okay, 196. That's pretty close, right? Height 48. And just to have these same, or fix the same problem, I'm going to do min height 48. And now when we go back, look at that, right? We're beginning to have some cards on our screen. And we also need some spacing between my title and the start of my cards. So in this flex row, I can add a margin top of, let's say, I don't know, 16 pixels. Is that good? Yeah, that's pretty good, right? To add some margins. Now, this looks a bit messy, doesn't it, right? We have this loading, we have error, then we have this. It's pretty messy. So we can utilize the main feature of React, which is composable views, to make this better. And we can actually take this and let's move it out into its own separate component so it's easy to work with. Remember what I said in last lecture, though, that we don't want individual components to kind of, we don't want them to be in the same like pages file. It's not that good there. So let's make, and this is actually good practice. So in this web folder, we'll make a new folder called components. I'll make a folder called organizations. So this is like organization components all relating to the organization feature if I have multiple. And then I'll create a new file called organization card.tsx. And I can write export default function organization card. Also, one thing I want to note here, because I think this is a bit different. Whoops, that's a line, not a circle. I am not sure why it's doing that, but that's fine. You'll notice that this is kind of hyphenated and lowercase. So in Next.js, we do, instead of having the all uppercase, we typically do this as convention, lowercase separated by hyphens, okay? It's auto-completing stuff here. That's no fun. We'll copy it manually. So we will make this here and go under. And also, this is another thing. See this, how it's like writing code for me? This is very nice, but sometimes it will write the wrong code and then throw things off, right? So be very careful when you are relying too much on these tools. So I will return this. And of course, you'll notice here that I'm missing my organization, so I can provide it as props. So in my props, I can say that I am expecting a object called an organization, and I need to type now my input object right here. This is my input object. I need to add a type for it. So I can define type organization card props is equal to organization. And my input here is just going to be a single organization, right? And so we're going to use the data model that we defined here. And now we can add this as our type. So now our input is going to be organization. And so I can now go back here, and instead of having this div, I can write instead organization card, and then add a key and an organization on top of it like this. So now this card is referring to this component, and when I go back, it's all the same, right? So now we want, let's go back here. We need to like bold our text and stuff to make it a bit bigger. It looks like the title is quite a bit bigger, so we can factor that in. So in this paragraph, we'll have class name, text, large might work, and then font bold. Whoops, font bold. And there we go, right? It matches somewhat, it's close. We also have a description. right? And add this. So P organization dot short description, I believe is what we use on the homepage. You can see now that that adds a short description below it. We will make this text slightly more gray. That way it's a bit, easier to differentiate. So I think what I like here, usually slate is a pretty nice color. That's a decent gray. There we go. We can make it slightly darker by increasing this number. We'll try 700. Whoops. 700 maybe. There we go. 700. Very good. And so now you can see we're beginning to get there, right? We have a pretty similar setup. And I can also have like this nice little circular icon. And this is actually another key thing I want to bring up. So in Next, we actually have a better way, and I'll show you this actually, because it'll alert me. So in here, I have my name, but since my name here and my icon are at the same, like on the same row, let's make a row. So I can make a div and put in here this in the div and indent this so it's easier to read. And then right here, class name, what is it? Flex row. I'm going to supply a gap as well because I know that I'm going to need a separator between my image and my paragraph. Okay, so we're here. And now I can add my image. So how do we usually add images? We use image, right? And then href. Yes. No. SRC. Yes, SRC, not href. Sorry about that. It's a bit late now, so if I'm making those mistakes, I do apologize. So SRC equals organization dot logo, and I'm going to tab this because often we use this alt here for accessibility purposes. So if people are blind, for example, or aren't able to see very well, screen readers will show this alt text or like read out this alt text instead. For now, I'm going to erase it for simplicity, and I don't know, the size that it randomly told me might be too big. Probably will be. There we go. Yeah, it's way too big. Let's decrease this down. So maybe W6 and H6 might work. A little bit bigger, right? So you can kind of see the development process here. I want to stress also that I haven't written any code before this, so hopefully this kind of presents a relatively authentic view of what goes on. All right, so 40 pixels is what I had. So is there something close? Yeah, W9 is probably close. Okay, close enough. We'll take that, right? So we have an image. Now we probably want our image here to be centered. So we want this image, because if you notice, this image and this like text are not like center aligned. So we can do that by in this div writing align center, I believe. Sorry, not align center. It should be item center. Yeah. Okay. And now, see, now they're centered. So that's pretty nice and pretty nifty. And we want to make this rounded, of course. So there's actually, I think, rounded full as a command. Whoops. What is happening here? My drawing tool, turn on. Okay. I think this is rounded full, gives a 100% roundness. So it makes it into a circle like so, which is very nice. The only thing is, though, here you'll notice that when I highlight over, it actually writes, using image could result in slower LCP, something we haven't talked about, and higher bandwidth. Consider using image from Next Image or a custom image loader to optimize images. This may incur additional cost from your provider. So this is a note because in Next.js there is a specific image tag that you can use, and it's imported from Next Image. And so if I switch this to this image tag, and I also need okay, now it's going to force me to, I think, provide alt text. So I might as well write just here. I'll just write organization name, and that should remove a lot of errors, right? So we now have an image, and image is missing required width property. Okay, well, we can just take this 36 pixels and supply a width of 36 and a height of 36 in here, and then we don't need the talent styles. So it looks like Next by default has a height and width that we use for the image. There we go. The reason why Next.js uses this special image is for like various things like caching images, making the loading a bit more efficient on images. So we can use this for now. The only thing that I will say though is that if we actually go to Next.js's image thing here, they might not write something about this, but it does come up that Vercel does cost money if you are using a very, very large app, right? And you need like a lot of power and a lot of storage and stuff. And in a very, very large app, this one item, this image, can actually increase your cost. So this will not affect us at all in terms of in terms of our local development. It's not going to affect anything, but it will affect it if you are trying to deploy a very large app. So that's just something to keep in mind when we switch over to image. Okay, but we have it here. We can also add a nice margin top to this to kind of separate. Sorry, that's the wrong. I meant to add it to the description. So we'll add it to the description here, and that adds like a nice gap here. Okay, so you can now see that we have a pretty one-to-one recreation, other than, of course, we're missing some data. And also, this esports text is really, really long compared to what they have here. And actually, this is another thing that's kind of important to note, actually. If you ever have text overflowing like this, and you want it to like cut off at a certain line, there's actually a Tailwind style for that. So let's add that. There's something called, I believe, like line clamp. Yeah. So line clamp, and then the number tells you the number of lines we want to limit to. So if I've selected line clamp 3, you'll see that after the third line, it's going to say ... and that's it, right? It kind of hides it, which is nice. In our main site, you can see that we're using a line clamp of 2. So we can change this to line clamp 2 to kind of make it a more one-to-one. And so now we only show 2 lines of the description. Right? Now the last thing is that we have this button. We have this purple button, which when we click on it should open up the detail of the page. What happened here? Let's go back to organizations, details. There we go. Not sure what I did to cause that error to happen, but I think I must have clicked something. Details makes it open, right? So I want to add a details button. So I can do so. And a good way of doing this is, again, if we want to make it a one-to-one thing, let's kind of check out. So our size is like around 48 pixels high and width of 92. So we can make something similar. And I'll do this in a div. So we'll say div here, class name, width of, I think it was what, 90 something. So we can do 96. Was it exactly? Oh, sorry, 40. Yeah, 92. Okay, and then 48, which I know is built in because it's a even multiple of 4, so it should be in here. Yep, 48. So now we have a width and a height for our button, and we can add this color. Again, using the color meter tool, we can figure out what this color is. It looks like it's going to be 63519F. All right, so BG 63519F, and now look at that. We have a button appearing. Of course, doesn't look right now. Let's fix that. So we have a nice rounded, you notice how it rounds the entire way. So if we do rounded full again, it should work. Is this the right, did I do that right? Rounded, let me make sure because it didn't, I think it, no, yeah, rounded full should be right. Let's try. Yeah, it is right. Also, this height here, I feel, this says 48 pixels, but you'll notice that there's kind of like this is a slightly annoying thing. There's a slight inset here. So actually, the actual size of my button might be, okay, it's actually 92 by 40. So we might want to decrease this to 11 because that's 40. Is there 40? Yeah, there is 40, H10. Okay, so that looks a bit more correct, right? That looks better. We have a text that says details in the middle of our button, so we'll write details in here. Perfect. We need to center this text, so we can do so by, how do I want to do this? I think it would be easier to cut this, put this in a paragraph, and then make this a flex box. This might not be the absolute best way to do it, and then say align or item center, justify center, which aligns, like it centers it on both axes, so the x-axis and the y-axis. And then in here we can add some styling for our text color. So this can be text white and text center, I think we need, and probably font semi-bold maybe. Let's see. There we go. Right? Yeah, it's looking similar. It's not exact, but it's close. I think that should be good enough. And now we obviously need to make this bottom, we need to move it all the way to the bottom of our container. So a very shortcut type way to do that is to say MT auto, which will this actually do anything? Let's see. No. Okay. Let's then think about this. So in order to make this bottom aligned, we need to make sure that all of our items in here kind of take up any of the remaining space, and only this item is remaining. So I think the way I have to do that is take all of this, which is all the other items, wrap this in a div. My intuition might be wrong here, so we'll see. And then make this a flex column grow. Does that do anything? Let's see. Or maybe do I have to put grow on this one? Okay, that obviously did not work correctly. So let's try this again. I feel like what we had originally should work with a auto margin top. Surprised it did not, but that's okay. Let's see. What are we left with here? We have 40 pixels. You'll see by default we have a well, another way we can do this maybe. Let's see if margin bottom 0 works. No. We need this we need the text, this organization text technically to grow. So I'm trying to see if adding any of these fixes the problem. I don't think it is, because our overall element is not a... Oh, that might explain it. Our overall class is not a flex box. And I think grow only works in a flex box. There we go. All right. So you can see, there we go. Some kind of live debugging there. So the problem is that in order for my grow to work properly, and what grow does is it basically takes an element and grows it to the max it can. And in order for that to work, it needs to be in a flex box. Now it looks like our card was never made a flex box. So okay, there we go. That now works. And then we can right align this element by... This should work now by writing ML auto, margin left auto. There we go. So now we are right aligned. Okay, so we have a button, and this button should go to my organization page, right? So my organization page will show me some more details about the organization, but notice I have multiple of these, right? So I have like ACM as its own page, I have App Team Carolina as its own page, and all of these routes are like organizations dash and then the slug. So App Team, for example, ACM, for example. And so this is a great place to use our dynamic routes that we talked about in the last lecture. So what I can do is I can go here to Pages, New Folder, and actually right now I'm just using the home page of my site, so it's like at localhost 3000. If I wanted to move everything into the organizations page, I could, but for now we'll forget the organization piece and just have our dynamic route. So I can write here slug.tsx, and now this should match. If I don't have an index and I have like anything after that slash, it should match here. So I can write export default function, organization detail page. And in here, I can say return, and we'll just return some organization details here. We'll just return this for now. And I want to show you that this is linked. So if I go now here to localhost and I were to go and type in anything like ACM, it should bring me to this page where it says organization details here, right? So that's really nice. And I can also link now each of these buttons to that page. So to do that, in my organization card, right, this was my div. And I can wrap this div by a link object, and the link object is used to interact with our router in Next. So if I write link here, and then I put this div in here, and I say class name, not class name, we'll do href equals, and then slash, and then we want to append after that our slug. So we'll make this actually TypeScript, and we will add in here using our special syntax for string interpolation, organization dot slug. And now when I click on any of these buttons, you can see that it brings me to that page. So you can see ACM here, a bit here, CADs here, right? So that's kind of my routing, and that works really nicely. So now I need to go here, and the first thing I need to do is I need to go to my page and add add this, right? Because I want this background to take up my entire page. Now, another cool thing and remember I talked about last time that this app right here, this app.tsx is like a pass-through. So any page that's selected in one of these, like by the router, let's say I load the home page or I load this page, it's going to actually render this return and then replace component with your page. So what we can actually do, this is a bit of a trick, is that because I would need to copy this div in every page in order to have my color like take up the whole background, let's move this to here. So I can wrap my component by a div that has this class name of this background, this 100% screen height, and this padding. So I can put this component in here, and now in all of my components, I will not need that. So if I go back here, you can see it works. And if I go to my organization details, look at that, right? I have that styling persisting throughout my page. And now I don't need it in here anymore. So all of this I can remove from this div, and I'll just have an empty, let's just say I have a fragment here that contains the rest of my items. All right, and so now I have that styling carrying through using that app component. All right, so now that I have that, we can, well, what do we need to do? We have our slug. We now need to load organization data, right, for my organization. And in this example, instead of using useQuery, I'm going to use the getStaticProps version of loading data, right? So the useQuery is for loading data on the client, and then getServer-side props will be used for loading data, kind of pre-fetching the data, right? Which helps for SEO and various things that we talked about kind of in the last lecture. And there's actually a separate API for this, getOrganization/slug. And so if I try this out on like ACM, and actually I should do this instead of doing it on the real site, since I am using my localhost version. Let's go to the localhost version of Docs. It should be the exact same. They're running the same project, but you know, just for a sanity check, I can go here and type ACM, and now I get the ACM data. And notice that's a little bit different in the shape, right? So instead I have more details, including all the events that are hosted by the organization. Now this is, I don't believe, actually shown on this page yet, but you know, it's still there. So we can take, this is our model of our data that we're trying to use this time. It's slightly different, right, than our other model. And so under this models here, I have organization. Well, let me create a second one. And since I'm on what we call like a detail page that shows more information about my organization, let's call this type organization detail. And so I have all of this here. This is what my official, what it should look like and what the outputs are like. And so then here, I should be able to write like ID, number, name. Well, okay, yeah. I'm curious if it would just autocomplete for me, but it looks like we'll take this version. This is this is Copilot helping me out a little bit here. We'll tab through, and then we have events. Now, event is something that we will need to also specify what that is. And this actually contains all this stuff. So what I'm going to do is, let's just ignore event. I believe if I don't include the field, it just won't load the data, and that will prevent all of, you can see how much extra event data there is, and since we don't show it, we don't really need it here. Does that actually make it the same as what I have above? It actually might. I think it is the same. Okay, so since it is the same, let's just use the same. That was a bit of a tangent. But you should always check every time, anytime you change your API route, always check that the data shape is the same, because it's not guaranteed to be, right? So if you have differences in the output data, you will need different models. But in this case, it looks like it's the same, so we don't have to worry about it. Okay, so on the homepage here, how do we load our organization detail data? Well, the first thing is we want to load it on the server. So we want to load the organization detail page data on the server and pass that data in when rendering via SSR or on the client, right? So whenever we're rendering, we want this data to be fetched on the server. And so to do that, we will write a export async function get server side props, right? So get server side props is this is a name that you have to use. You have to use this name. And so what Next.js does is in any of these pages files, if it sees a get server side props function being exported from it, it's going to run this first, and then the output of this function, right? The overall, the output of this will be passed in as props to my component, right? So, and also context, because we're using TypeScript, it's going to ask us to type it. So the type of this should be get server side props context. And so you can import that in. And now that we have this, let's try and access our data. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to get this slug, right? Because this slug is how we're going to, well, make a request to our API, right? We have API organizations that we pass in the slug. So we need this whatever slug of the page that we're on. We need that. And so to do that, I can say const slug equals, and we have to write here context.params.slug. And it's telling me here that this could be nullable, or it's like possibly undefined. So we know that this will be defined because this is the way that this is loading. It's, we wouldn't even route to this page if it wasn't there. So I'm just going to add an exclamation point to tell TypeScript, hey, this is definitely going to be here. So slug should be here. And you also notice that slug is technically could be 3 different types of values. It could be a string, it could be an array of strings. So to prevent any problems, let's just make sure it's a string by casting it. And now we can load our data. And so to load our data, well, we can do this right here. So const response equals await fetch, and we can await, because the server-side props is an async function, we can write await right here, and we can fetch this data. And then once we have the data, so I can write here const data equals, well, we need to run response.json to convert it into a JavaScript object. And then we can further cast this using as unknown as organization. There we go. And so now we have data, which is our organization data loaded from our API, and this is loading on the server. And now we want this data, right, to be accessible from within our component. So to do that, I will go here, I will write return, and I'm creating an object to return, and the property of this object should be props, and then any properties that I want to pass in here are then going to be within this second set of curly braces. So I have props, I want my organization prop to be set to the data that I collected. And so then up here, I can pass this in as props by simply writing organization right here. And of course, I need to supply a type to this object. So I can write here type organization detail page props equals an organization object, and right there. So now we have organization. We've loaded this data in. And to prove that this works, let's make our title. So I'm going to now start writing some, now that we actually have our data stored, let's start our UI. So I have this empty fragment here, And just like I did on my homepage here, I had this nice paragraph. So let's put that in here. That kind of is my title, except now instead of just saying organizations, I want it to be the name of my organization. And I can get this from the prop. So organization.name, right? And that's the cool thing. I'll go back here, I'll refresh, and oops, it looks like we have a fetch failure here. So let's see why. First off, I'm going to go back here. If I click on app team, all right, fetch failure. Let's see, we might have some alerts here. We just say fetch failed. Nothing very specific. Let's see if we can debug this one together. We have connection refused, port, okay, page app team. Did I forget something? We have API organizations, and then we have our slug passed in here. This should be correct. So let's see what might be going wrong. I think in my original one here, in my query, I used HTTP fetch localhost organizations. You know what? Is this named organization? No, this is correct here. So HTTP API organizations and then the slug. So we have this connection refused going on. And this particular problem actually is also, I think, going to be related to the problem I had earlier. So I'm going to try reloading real quick my project to see if that's going to fix it. And if it doesn't, we will do something about that. So we'll go back here. Okay. I want to also check out, so under inspect element, under network, we can see what network requests are made. And I guess this will all be done on the server side because, so we won't actually get any output here. But I will print out real quick. So let me print out the slug just to make sure that I'm getting that right. Sorry, console.log, not print. So let's see here. Do we print that out correctly here? So by the way, any like print statements that you make that are in get server side props, it should print out into this console rather than the other one. So if I do this, I go here and I load my page, I should get some output up here near the top. Yes, okay, so we do have, our slug is loaded correctly. All right, everyone, I am back. So I had to do more investigating, and it looks like this problem was actually caused by the dev container. So you can completely ignore it because, again, this will not happen. This will not happen when you are working on this because so I have this particular, just as a bit of a tangent, I have like the CSXL project that I'm running locally here in order to get this API was actually in another dev container, and connecting one dev container to another dev container, for some reason, this is where it failed. It didn't fail in the other one. So I'm out of the dev container now, and now all of a sudden it's working. I didn't change anything. Again, in your own projects, it'll be fine, regardless whether you're in the container or not. Okay, anyway, so now you can see that when I go back to my page, I have my title appearing on the page, right? So this is the title for my organization up here. And so then the last thing is that they need to have a similar card to this. And so let's make that. So I have my card here. It's around 600-ish, 600 something pixels wide. So we can add that. So up here, right, I need to now have a div, and the background color should be the same as my other card. So let me right click here and press close others, and then go to components. Yes, so see this particular background color right here, and I'll actually copy everything about this except for the height. So our height is actually going to stick to just the content. So we actually don't need to touch the height, but we do need the width. And so our min width needs to be 600 pixels, which do they not have? If they don't have that provided, that's all right. We can manually write it in. So this, what we have here, I think is, if I remember correctly, should be around, yeah, so 638 pixels is what it is, so we can match it exactly by going here and writing 638 pixels. And then width 300 or 638 pixels. And now if I go back, we now have a card. It's the same size, there's nothing in it. For some reason that doesn't look like the same size. I don't know if that's just my eyes or if I read the width of this wrong. I need to double check. It says 600. I don't know if I really entirely believe that. So we'll see. we'll see as we go. So okay, we'll add a margin top as well of, let's say, 3, I think, maybe 4. That way we have a 16 pixels, so margin top 4. Okay, so now we have our card, and now we can add some data. So the first thing we have is, of course, our title. So we'll write that here. I'm going to use the same, actually, this exact same paragraph that I had here, because it was text large and font bold. Right here, so I'll add that to my card, and so now I have it. I want the icon again, so I will add the image, and again, I'm just going to copy this because I already have it. I need to import image, so I'm going to do so right here. Whoops, it actually didn't let me import image. Let's see why. It's saying that JSX Elements does not support having a props property. Okay, let's see here. Import image from next image should just fix the problem. There we go. Okay, and then image and image. I'm not sure. Has no exported member image. Oh wait, let's go back here and let's see. Okay, I need to copy that. There we go. Better. Okay, so our import statement's right. And now we have this stacked, but of course we want it to be horizontal. So we need this, we need to put this in a div. So we'll kind of nest this in a div that's a flex row. And so now you can see they're here. We need to add we'll add a gap. And we will say align or item center. And so now this is nicely centered here. I want to also add, I have like these little, these links here, which we could add. I probably won't actually because it's not really functionally that useful. I guess this does go somewhere though, but we'll keep this out for now. And then we just have a description. So paragraph, organization dot long description this time, and there we go. So now, whoops, I put that in the wrong div. So I put this in, so see, this was my flex row. I accidentally put it in the flex row because my indenting is bad. So let's indent so it's more clear and then move this out. All right, amazing. Now it should be correct. There we go. And the last thing we can do is we can add some styling to this. Kind of a similar thing here of margin top 2, text late 700 should be good. And now we are left with our details page, like so, right? So what we ended up having was we have our home page, which is located over here. If I went out, I have a home page, and I can click on details to get to my about page, which is very, very cool. The last thing, which I will not do here, is the search bar, but the search bar would be simple enough to do if you knew how to, or if you knew what API you had to hit. I think it was, if I remember correctly on this one, we would need something like, I guess with get organizations, it would be something like this, and then I think filter equals, and then like the whatever we type in. I'm going to leave that maybe to an exercise. You will have the chance to work with it. Again, the main thing there is if we wanted to have like a search bar, we might need to have like a state that's like a search bar text, set search bar text equals use state, and then make sure that this, if you're using this state in a function like this, make sure that you also have it in the query key so that anytime this particular state updates, our use query is also going to update. So I'm going to fix this back to normal. So all right, so in the end, we have an organization page that looks pretty similar. And we also can click on the details and load a about page. This data here that you see was located on the server, or it was fetched by the server using the get server side props versus use query for loading our overall data, right? And the benefit of this is that if you actually go, and I can show you, if I go to, let's say, where's Perl Hacks? There we go. Perl Hacks, inspect element. Under here, under my network tab, if I refresh this, you'll see that I end up grabbing this Perl Hacks document right here. This is the HTML I end up getting from the server. And you'll notice that this HTML that I get has all of the text in it, right here. And so this is really good because this is indicating that this is being done on the server, right? My server is giving me a HTML file with the text already in it. So this is really, really good for search engines. Meanwhile, if I go back to my home page and I clear my console and I refresh, this page right here, notice what you see. You see a paragraph that says loading, right? Because initially when we load our page, our data is not given back to us. So in this view, our search engine would not see any of our organizations, which is fine because majority of the time we want that to be on our detail page. But you can see that the concepts that we're learning in class, whether that's get server-side props, things like server-side rendering, and how we end up getting all of this data and loading this data, all of it is relevant because in the end we end up with seeing it in real time, right, in our projects. So this is very, very exciting. The code for this will be public. I do apologize again about this, about the localhost and this URL thing. I'm going to see if there's a way that I can get this to be fixed so that you can run this on your own as well. But I recommend following kind of this same type of structure when working on AO5. All right, everyone, that is all I had for this video. I know it was quite long, but I hope that this was helpful and a good resource. If you have any questions, definitely see us in office hours, and we'll see you all next time in class.